After 10 years of stalemate, the Greeks took the city of Troy by engineering a breach. They bypassed the walls that brute force couldn't break by hiding a strike team inside a wooden horse, ending the war through coordinated deception. The man behind that plan was a king named Odysseus. With the city in ruins, his focus shifted to the logistics of the return trip, sailing his fleet back to his kingdom of Ithaca to reunite with his wife and son. But the journey home placed a mortal man into a landscape ruled by physically superior forces. To reach Ithaca, he would have to navigate waters controlled by gods and inhabited by creatures that could destroy his ships with a single gesture. In a world where physical combat with a monster meant guaranteed death, how could a normal human expect to survive? Odysseus survived by prioritizing the logic of the strategist over the ego of the warrior. He treated every obstacle as a puzzle to be solved, proving that when the odds are asymmetric, survival depends on the ability to think faster than the opponent can strike. When Odysseus and his men were trapped by the giant cyclops Polyphemus, conventional weapons were useless. The giant simply grabbed two of the warriors and crushed them, treating the trained soldiers as nothing more than a source of food. Recognizing that he couldn't win through force, Odysseus immediately changed tactics. He used the giant's own biology against him, offering up cases of undiluted wine to cloud the giant's judgment and lull him into a stupor. The trap relied on a psychological hack. When the drunken giant asked for his name, Odysseus told him his name was Nobody. As the giant slept, the men used a sharpened stake to blind him. They spared his life to ensure he could move the boulder blocking the exit. When other giants arrived, Polyphemus shouted that nobody was killing him, so they left. To bypass the blinded giant standing at the door the next morning, the men tied themselves to the undersides of the sheep. As the animals grazed, Polyphemus felt their woolly backs, never realizing the men were clinging to the bellies just inches away. It was a perfect tactical execution, until a lapse in discipline ruined the victory. As the ship pulled away, Odysseus's ego compelled him to shout his name to the shore. This gave the giant the identity he needed to invoke a curse from his father, the sea god Poseidon. Poseidon's curse forced Odysseus to adopt even more rigorous defenses against magical and psychological threats. When passing the island of the Sirens, creatures whose songs drove sailors to jump overboard, Odysseus plugged his crew's ears with beeswax. This physically neutralized their ability to hear the song, ensuring they avoided a fatal mistake. Odysseus, however, wanted to hear the song for himself. He ordered his men to lash into the mast, leaving his ears open but his body physically restrained, so he couldn't surrender to the music or steer the ship toward the rocks. He applied the same cold logic to the pass between Scylla and Charybdis. Odysseus chose to steer towards Scylla, a six-headed monster, knowing he would lose exactly 6 men. He accepted this loss to avoid Charybdis, a whirlpool that would have mathematically guaranteed the destruction of the entire ship. But while the leader was disciplined, his crew was not. Unable to resist greed, they opened a bag of winds that blew them far off course, and their hunger eventually drove them to eat the sacred cattle of the sun god, an act that triggered immediate divine retaliation. Strategic brilliance solves the problem of monsters, but it cannot solve a lack of team discipline. A single thunderbolt from Zeus destroyed the ship, leaving Odysseus as the only survivor of the voyage, stranded and alone. 2 decades after leaving for war, Odysseus finally returned to the coast of Ithaca. He found his palace occupied by 100 younger, armed men who were living off his wealth and pressuring his wife to remarry. The tactical reality hadn't changed. One aging man could not win a head-on fight against 100 opponents. He turned again to deception. With divine help, he disguised himself as a frail beggar to walk into his own palace unnoticed, using the enemy's own arrogance as a cloak. This disguise enabled him to conduct a full reconnaissance of his own home. He moved through the halls for days, identifying which servants were still loyal and mapping the layout of the enemy force while they ignored his presence. Before the final confrontation, he executed a silent sabotage. He and his son systematically removed all the weapons and shields from the Great Hall and locked them away, effectively neutralizing the suitors' ability to fight back. The trap closed when Penelope announced a contest. She would marry the man who could string Odysseus's old bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads. After every suitor failed, the beggar took the bow, strung it effortlessly, and sent a single arrow through every ring. Odysseus dropped the disguise and turned the bow on the suitors. With the hall doors barred and the enemy disarmed, his preparation allowed him to dismantle the larger force. He systematically cleared his home, finally reuniting with his wife. This story redefined the ancient hero. It demonstrated that in a world governed by overwhelming forces, the most effective defense is not a stronger sword, but the patience to plan and the mental discipline